Hello everyone, good afternoon. UPSC Mains 2022 is over now, and this time political science and international relations optional rocked. Basically, the questions which has been asked in paper 1 and paper 2, which was very comfortable, very good, right? And this time, the PSIR optional students actually did very well. Here today I am Dr. Bijendra Jha. I will talk about paper 2 analysis. I have already done paper 1 analysis. Now look at the paper 2, what kind of question has come, and let me tell you one thing, that whatever I have taught, everything is there from the written dictated notes in the classroom, right? Let's see what kind of question it had. You all know that paper 1 or paper 2 had two sides, sections, section 1 and section 2. Section 1 has 4 questions and section 2 has also 4 questions, and students needed to attempt 5 questions out of 8, but question number 1 and question number 5th were compulsory. So look at the what kind of question were there in this time. You see question number 1 here, question number 1, which has 5 smaller questions, right? One need to write in 150 words, right? So look at the question number first, right? First A, discuss the main limitations of the comparative method to the study of political science. So question was direct. Basically it is asking the limitations of comparative method, right? What are the limitations of comparative method? So first, one should start with some introduction. What is comparative method, right? What is comparative? Comparative method. And then one should start introduce in the introduction that Aristotle is known as the father of comparative politics, right? He studied 158 constitution through comparison. Fine, through comparison, right? And then one should start about there are many approaches of in comparative politics, right, to understand the politics basically. And then one should start about that limitations. If you talk about, there are many comparative method or approaches, like historical approaches, philosophical approaches. There are historical approaches, institutional approaches that was limited to their explanation was limited to the Western society, and the Eastern society was excluded. Secondly, if you look at the new comparative method, for example, political system or a structural functional approach or political culture approach or political methodology approach, what are the limitations in this method? Basically, Hannah Arendt talked about that comparative method always looks for empirical inquiry, right, and empirical finding, and it does not substantiate or give value to the some universal or value loaded concept. Now the Harold Laswell was also very critical of this comparative method. Why? Because Harold Laswell, you all know that he was a champion of philosophical method, right? So he criticized and he said that comparative method does in political science is a value free, right, and it is highly influenced by behavioral movement, right, and that led to the decline of political science, right. So that are the limitations of comparative method. Basically, it looks at certain institution, it looks at certain arrangement of government, it looks at culture, it looks at, but it ignores the meta idea like justice, equality, liberty, right? And it gives, it promotes behavioral or scientific idea, right, or empirical inquiry, right. So entire empiricism, right, and behavioral movement led to the decline of political theory. So that was the also limitations, right. So 150 words, that is sufficient, one needed to quote it. Now let me see the second question of, now second question is, what are the main challenges faced by developing countries in the era of globalization, right. So first it is asking, developing countries are facing some challenges, what are they, right, in the era of globalization. It was a direct question. Now if you look at the era of globalization that has started, so first one should start with what is the era of globalization. So one should start with 1960s, right, and 1970s, right. 70s gave impetus to free flow of capital, free flow of labor, free flow of trade and commerce, culture, right, finance, etc. in institutions, and that led to the era of globalization. Now if you look at in 2022 we are living in a global world, a global village, where there are interconnection and interconnected rightness are there, and world is highly complex and dependent. Now if you look at the challenges, now come to the body part. What are the challenges faced by developing country? The first challenge is climate change. How to deal with the climate change, right? If you look at the developing countries are the worst victim of the climate change, right? Secondly, if you look at the food security, right, in the era, if you look for the example one can give, since since February 24, 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine, you look at the its impact on the global world, and that is due to the globalization, because the world is highly connected. So food security is another problem, right? Then third, globalization has given birth to unprecedented inequality, hunger and poverty, right? So inequality, hunger and poverty, these are the faced by the developing countries, right? Fourth, if you look at energy crisis, right? Energy crisis, right? Apart from it, there are several crises like health crisis, right? The cultural homogenization crisis. West has flooded its product in the developing countries in the wake of globalization, right? The industrial west is being flooded, flushed into the developing countries. So these are the problems faced by challenges faced by developing countries, right, in the wake of globalization. I hope so. 150 words, it was sufficient, right? I'm not taking class here, I'm just talking about what kind, how one can approach to the paper, right? So look at the question number 3C, right? First C, yeah. So look at the question. it is asking discuss the commonalities between the Marxist and realist approach to the study of international relation. Now, there are many differences between Marxist and realist approach to understand the international politics. One should start with introducing these two approach, that realist and Marxist. Marxist are the two major and dominant theory of international relation who try to look and interpret international politics, right. Secondly, if you look at realist who talks about human nature, what are the, if you look at the realist, they are based on Machiavellian politics, Hobbesian human nature, right, and Machiavellian power politics and Hobbesian human nature. Whereas if you look at the Marxist, they try to look at international relation through the lens of class. But that is the difference. What is the commonality? Commonality is zero power sum game rule. Zero power sum game rule. What does it say? It said one can acquire power at the cost of other. So A can acquire power at the cost of B. Fine. What realist talks about, if there is a two power, one can gain power, ultimately other will lose power, right. Similarly, if you talk about Marxist who wants to talk, who wants to actually explain that a country A can develop at the rate of, at the cost of others' exploitation. So developed countries are more because not they are developed, because there are underdevelopment of the third world, right. So developed countries are developed not because they did a well, there was a huge industrialization, there was a this and that, there was a stage process of industrialization. No, they are developed because they created a world system in which they benefited by the underdevelopment of the other, right. So these are the similarity. There is one only sole similarity between Marxist and realist approach to the international politics, that is they both believe in zero power sum game rule, right. So one can gain at the cost of other, that's it, right. And there are differences, there are many differences. So this is the question one need to attempt like this, right. Now come to the next question. Question number 1D. Now it says bipolar structure of the world is more stable than the multipolar one. Comment, right. Basically it does not mention the name, but this is a statement of Kenneth Walsh. This is Kenneth Walsh's statement, right. And he argued that, so first one need to start with bipolar world, right, or balance of power, right, balance of power, right. And one should talk about that since Westphalia 1648 to the World War II, right, World War II, world was multipolar, right. And in multipolar world, the world witnessed many small war but also the large war, for example World War I and World War II. Now look at the post World War, post WW2 till 2022, right, or till actually we can't write because we are living the multipolar world till 2000. The world was a bipolar and the world witnessed, the world did not witness a single war. Why? Because the US and USSR both having leading the two pole, and both were aware about the capability of other to destroy each other, right? They were aware about mutually assured destruction because they were nuclear weapon state, right? So both were nuclear, both had nuclear weapon, right? And this world was more peaceful. The bipolar world was more peaceful. Since 2000, if you see, there is a rise of Russia one side, right, and rise of China on the other, right, rise of Japan, rise of Germany. Now world is tending to be from bipolar to multipolar, and you can see instability, how Russia had attacked on Ukraine, right, because it is a nuclear weapon state, and it had other power, for example China, who actually support unconditionally, right? So Kenneth Walls argued that the bipolar world is more stable than the multipolar world, right? Because both pole had nuclear weapon, and it was a multipolar world. It was a stable world. Fine. So that would be the answer. Now let me come to the next question. Question is, national interest is an essentially contested concept, right? If you know the actually basic meaning of national interest, it is a vague concept. It is a ambiguous concept. Every country adopt national interest, right? So one should start with defining national interest. What is a national interest? Interest for which a nation pursue, right, for its own benefit. But what could be the national interest? There could be many things national interest. For example, economic development, right? For example, developing nuclear weapon, right? Now, for example, modernization of military. But there are many actions. For example, Russia attack on Ukraine, is the name of national interest. Russia attacked Afghanistan in 1979 on the name of national interest, right? US established a nuclear weapon in the southern part of in the just southern part of the Indian continent, that is called Garcia Island, on the name of national interest. Therefore, if you can see, US attacked many countries, right, on the name of to protect the national interest. So therefore, you can see, national interest is essentially a contested concept, right, and there is no universal definition of national interest, right? Whatever nation state pursue, they want, they say that this is their national interest. Even Nehru pursued NAM, as a national interest. We are following Quad, leaving NAM, right, as a national interest. So there are many examples could be put here, and one can one can talk about how the term national interest is essentially a contested concept, right? Let me talk about the question number 2. So we have done one. Now look at the question number 2. Now it talks about how has the electoral democracy augmented the participation of people, right, in a democratic process. Now, it is a purely liberal theory of democracy in a different framework, different sentence. Now, it is a liberals, right, liberal theory of democracy. So, one should start talking about electoral, election. So, it is a liberal democracy which talks about free and fair election. It is a liberal democracy which talks about free and fair election, right, through which representation can be done, right. So, one should start with the liberal democracy, how liberals talks about electoral, liberals talks about free and fair election, right, free and fair election, and they also talk about periodic election, and they also talk about equal right to vote to everyone, equal right to vote. And there was a worldwide movement for right to vote. For example, working class in the Europe did lots of movement, social movement to acquire right to vote. Women did lots of movement, various movement to right to vote. In the third world like India, women, right, women and others did a movement, launched a movement to get right to vote. Now, so electoral democracy, if you look at electoral democracy, when the electoral democracy is applied, it establishes political equality. It establishes political equality. It means, one person, one vote and one value, right, and it strengthen the democracy, right, it allow and strengthen the people participation, right, for electing their representative, right. Therefore, one can say that electoral democracy, and one can give example of many. For example, J.S. Mill, right, who talks about, and J.S. Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill, who talked about right to vote for women. One can talk about Mary Wollstonecraft, one can talk about Jefferson, right, one can talk about John Locke, one can talk about many philosophers, right, who talked about that how free and fair election, how periodic election, right, and representative democracy strengthen the democratic process, right. That would be enough, right. Let me talk about the next question. Now look at the next question. Describe the composition of International Court of Justice and discuss its voluntary jurisdiction. Now, so there are two subset, question 1 and question 2. There are two questions. So first one need to talk about the composition of International Court of Justice. Everyone knows that the ICJ consists 15 judges, right, for and they are elected by the UN General Assembly and UN Security Council, right, and for 9 years, right, and their task function is to give legal advising on international law, and their function is also resolve the dispute of international nature, right. And second is discuss its voluntary jurisdiction. The both party involved in disputes should agree that yes, the ICJ must hear our case, and when the both party file a case in ICJ, the ICJ decisions are binding on the both parties. Mind it, right. So that is the actually answer. That would be the answer, right. It was a very easy answer, right. One can start with the ICJ. ICJ is a important organ of United Nations, right, and then one should start with the headquarter lies in The Hague. Then one should start with the composition, and then one can start about, how they deal with the jurisdiction functions, and then one should start talking about how do they actually, do the voluntary jurisdiction. Fine. Now let me talk about the next question, which is question number 3rd. Here question is, the critically examine the rise of People's Republic of China, right, as a great and its implication on Asian political order. Again, this is not a single question, it has a 2-part, right. So first, it says to you, critically examine the China, right, as a great power, right, and then it tells you to write about implication on in Asian political order, right. Now one should start with Chinese Revolution in 1949, right, and 1949, how actually it established a communist republic, right, of China. And since 1970, right, when the moment US recognized China as a country and given permanent member seats, right, since 1970 China has done well, right, and if you look at the current scenario, in 2000 China's economy was 15 times less than the US, right. China's economy was 15 times less than the US, right. If you talk about 2022, the US economy is greater but only 1.5 times. So how China evolved as a great economic power, right. In terms of military modernization, China did well, right. It has evolved as a second power in the world. Thirdly, China, if you look at the OBOR project, or it is also called Belt Road Initiative, BRI project. Through the BRI project, how China had its own influence not only in Asia but also in Europe, Africa, especially Africa, Latin America. And if you look at the China's trade, right, the volume of trade, China's volume of trade is larger than any one country, right. Maximum country in the world do a larger trade with China. So for example, India's second largest or third largest could be China, right. South Korea first, second or third largest would be China. US first or second would be China, right. So for example Zambia, or for example South Africa, or for example Chile, first or second would be China. So if you look at China evolved as a great power, right, and its economy, its military, and China is concluded so many agreement with the various countries of the world, right. Now China is challenging, not only challenging, trying to displace US as a hegemon power, right. That is the impact globally as a rise of China. However, if you look at China, right, there is no democracy in China, right. That is a big loophole. Critically you have to examine the big problem, that China does not respect human right, right. So there are many annoyment within the China, right, and Chinese society. There are many protests, but China suppresses it. But how long it will suppress the movement, people's movement, right. Then if you look at China, of course has achieved a great power, but it has limitation. But because if you look at US through its soft power, it has more acceptance in the world, but China doesn't have, right. However, China evolved as a sharp power, but if you compare US and democratic country has more acceptance than the China, which is categorically called as communist country or country of authoritarian ruler. Now talk about implication on Asian political order. Now what is happening in Asia, right? If you look at Asia, it is a bipolar, right? And against China, India is a great power in Asia. China wants a unipolar Asia, but US wants bipolar or multipolar Asia. India wants multipolar Asia, right? But if you look at China, right, it is becoming aggressive. It is threatening all its neighbor, right? It is threatening India, right? It had so many conflict, including Galwan conflict. It is giving threat to Taiwan. It is giving threat to all country, neighboring country, right? It is giving threat to Japan, right? It had claim over the South China Sea along the line of 9-dash land, right? Therefore, if you look at in the Asian politics, China evolved, or China is emerging as a dominant power, right? And India has to face China in the next near future, and therefore if you look at various country, they have started Quad, right? They have started Quad, right? AUKU has been started. Now if you look at I2 U2 has been started in middle Gulf countries. Therefore China has larger implication in South Asian politics, right? So now one should come and let's see. Now discuss the conceptual dimension of collective security, right? So one should start with the concept of collective security. What is collective security, right? And how it evolved. For example, League of Nations in UN Security Council has responsibility, given assignment of collective security, and one should define in few lines what is it. Now if you look at 1990, there is a one concept called human security. The human security is also one concept that is called collective security, right? And if you look at responsibility to protect, right, that also evolved as a extension of collective security. So one should start with the collective security, idea of collective security, and one should then come to the right R2P, responsibility to protect, and then concept of human security. And the challenge the current world faces today, in the wake of Russia attack on Ukraine, and how collective security is failing, right, failing to fulfill its own responsibility, right? So that would be the way to treat the questions. Now let me come to the next question. Now discuss the efficacy of global conventions to combat international terrorism. So one should start with the defining international terrorism, right? International terrorism, and then one should talk about 9/11 incident, right? When Al Qaeda attacked on World Trade Center and Pentagon, right? And then how one global war on terrorism started. Global war on terrorism started, right? Fine. And after that one should come to the United Nations, many resolution, for example 1397, 1367, 1267, right, and many resolution which talks about that international community have agreement or on combating international terrorism, right. Before in 2021 UN again passed a resolution and it called the neighboring country of Afghanistan not to support terrorism, right. So, but if you look at the terrorist activities, it had grown exponentially throughout the world. So, therefore, if you look at the international conventions, right, the global conventions on terrorism has not curbed it, and there are many irritant to curb the global terrorism. For example, Pakistan, for example, China's move against the India and US to designate some organization as a terrorist organization, but some country don't want to designate, right. So, there is also conflict, conflict or contestation within the international community whether we should designate a particular organization as a terrorist organization, right. So, of course, it led a good initiative, otherwise, but it has become failed to combat international terrorism, right. So, one should talk about like this, then come to the next question, which is question number 4th A. Now, the question is identify and evaluate the reasons for deadlock in the WTO negotiations on fisheries between the developing and developed country. Now, WTO, actually there was only few, right. So, let me talk about how one should start. One should start with WTO negotiation, right, and one should give example of Doha round or Geneva Convention recently held in 2022, right, the 12th round of WTO negotiation, in which fisheries was major issues apart from the COVID-19 vaccines, technology, right, and other issues. Now, if you look at this WTO negotiation on Geneva, right, it is also called Geneva package. Here, what was the contestation between, right, developing country and developed country? There was a consensus on to agreement on fisheries, right, fisheries. And what was the agreement? That there was a 3 agreement, right. What was the 3 agreement? First, there should be curb on illegal and unregulated fishing. Third, there should be no overfishing, right, and we should save the stock which is depletion, which are on extinction. So, we should stop over fishing. And third, there should be no unregulated fishing in the high sea, the deep sea. But, right, so every country agreed on that, right. What was the contestation? Developing country like India wanted, exemption for the 25 years, right, under, differentiated and shared responsibility. Developing countries wanted 25 years exemption, transition, it is called transition phase, right, under differential and shared responsibility. But developed country, wanted to give only 2 years, right. That was the major concept, contestation between developing country and developed country on fisheries. So, it was very informative, right, a very informative information based question. So, it was information was asking, you should give information, right. So, now move to the next question. Now, what is the realist prescription to the state to ensure their survival in anarchical world? It is a direct question. Now, realist, so first one should talk about realist beliefs, right? So realist beliefs in Machiavellian power and Hobbesian human nature, right? And they assumes that international system is anarchic, right, due to absence of overarching authority. So first one thing. Secondly, just come to the what are their prescription. Their prescriptions are three. It's called 3S, right? It is called statism, right? Survivability, survivability, and third is self-help. That is the only three things they are talking about. Who? Realist. Realist prescribes only 3S to ensure your survival in anarchical world. What is statism? Statism refers to there is a hierarchy within a country. It means within a nation state there is a hierarchical authority, right? So there is a local government, there is a state government, there is a national government, and there is a hierarchy. National government is supreme, right? So whenever there is a any problem occurs at the local level, state level, or the national level, are the supreme authority to command, right, or to do violence or to control it. But if you look at the international scenario, beyond the nation state, it is not hierarchy, it is anarchy. Why it is anarchy in international system? Because there is no overarching authority, there is no international government, right? And therefore each nation state wants to have power, right, more power, right, to find security. So this is statism. Now come to survival, right? The realist thinks that the first and foremost law of diplomacy is to self-preservation. Every statesman should learn that their first job is to survivability in international relation, right? And for survivability they have to acquire power, right? They have to acquire power, without which they can't ensure survivability, self-preservation, right? And now come to the self-help. What is the self-help? Every country to work, for example, economic development, modernization of military, then go for the alliance, right? They go for the alliance. So these are the three basic prescriptions of realist, to ensure survival in any country. And there are many authors you can mention here, right? Morgenthau, right? And then E.H. Carr, right? Fine. Now move to next question. Now the question was directly from the current, right? It was directly from the current. Now Russia-Ukraine crisis has cast a dark shadow on energy needs of member states of the EU. It was a direct question. There is a number of articles in the newspaper, right, since February 2022, numbers of articles, numbers of analysis on how energy needs of the European Union is going to disturb due to Russia-Ukraine. Why? So one should start with how European Union country, EU, is dependent on Russian energy, right? For example, most of the country are dependent on Russian oil, coal, gas, etc. And approximately 35 to 40 and few country imports 90% of the energy requirement from the Russia. Now what happened? Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine is being supported by EU. EU supports Ukraine, right? And it has put so many sanctions along with the US on Russia. What Russia did? Russia stopped, blocked gas, energy, gas, oil, coal, etc. to giving, to Europe. Now what are the implications? Implications is that there is a rise, there is an inflation, rise of price of energy worldwide. Particularly, European Union members are facing the problem. The electricity, rate increase, the fuel price has increased, right? And European Union members are facing real energy crisis, right? So that would be the answer, right? Many newspaper reports actually reported this, how European Union is highly dependent on right. One can bring a realist here also, that that how security is being, Russia wants its own security, EU wants its own security, right? And they are doing self-help or survival, right? Now let me talk about the next question. Oh, it's over. I think we have done section A. We have done section A. Now come to the section B. Now look at the section B. Here again, question number 5th has 5 sub questions. So we have to face here 5A, 5B, 5C, 5D and 5E. Look at the question. First question was, peaceful coexistence remains the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. Comment. So one should start with what is peaceful coexistence, right? And one should start with that the peaceful coexistence was the policy of non-alignment movement, right, or Panchsheel, right? Panchsheel, right? Panchsheel policy adopted by Nehru, right? And that was carried out by successive prime minister, right? In 1997, Gujarat doctrine also included peaceful coexistence, right, as a major cornerstone of Indian foreign policy. India believes that we can coexist each other, we can help each other, right, and we cannot intervene in each other's internal matter, right, because as Atal Bihari Vajpayee said, we cannot change our neighbor. We can change our friend, but we cannot change our neighbor, right. So it was a important part of India's foreign policy. Even look at the neighborhood first policy, the Prime Minister Modi, who also argued that we can live peaceful. So from Nehru to Modi, peaceful coexistence remained one of the pillar of India's foreign policy, treating, in order to have diplomacy with neighborhood. Fine. So that would be the answer. Now come to the next question. Now discuss the way and means. It's asking way and means to realize greater economic cooperation among the member of South Asia. Now, discuss the way and means to realize greater economic cooperation among the member of South Asia. So, one should start with the member. What is the member of the South Asia? There are 7-8 states in as a member of the South Asia, right? They are actually interconnected through history, culture, food, religion, right? Language, right? And ethnic similarity and many, right? And it includes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, right? Nepal, right? So it includes all countries. And then once you start with the what are the ways? First, the South Asian countries are facing challenges. For example, India and Pakistan problem, right? India and Pak problem. So there are some disputes, right, between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, right? India and Bangladesh, right, or Bangladesh and Pakistan. Fine, it's asking about the member of the South Asia. So such disputes, should be resolved through the bilateral dialogue. And there could be the South Regional Organization, for example, SAARC, 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 or its trade agreement like SAFTA, right? SAFTA should be revived, in order to greater economic cooperation. What are the means? Means should be how we can achieve greater economic cooperation. First means I would talk about South Asian members should give free transition, right? Free transition among the South Asian members. But if you look at, for example, if India's goods wants to go to Afghanistan, but Pakistan does not give free transition, right, or way to go Afghanistan. So India has to go to first of Iran and then come to Afghanistan. Or just reverse the example. If Pakistan had to send something to Bangladesh, and if India does not give transition, then what happens? India send it through the sea, right, or through China. Now look at this problem, the transition, free transitions. If we give free transition to each other, we can have greater economic infrastructure and economic cooperation among the member countries. Secondly, second means everyone should give most favored nation status, right? Every country, each other country should give most favored nations status, right? That we can enhance greater economic cooperation, right? So here and then wrap up. Now let me move to the next question. Discuss the steps required to realize hydro cooperation between India and Bangladesh. So one should start with the India and Bangladesh relationship, how much we are historically, culturally, religiously tied with the Bangladesh, and India was the first country which declared Bangladesh as an independent country, right? Between India and Bangladesh there are many cooperation, right? But if you look at, there are high cooperation in hydro cooperation, right? But there are approximately 51 rivers we shares with the Bangladesh. 51 rivers we share with Bangladesh, right? And most of the rivers are, the boundary between the rivers are not clarified, and we have lots of problem in, for example, Tista problem. For example, recently the one water problem has been concluded. So we have lots of river issues with Bangladesh, and that should be concluded, and we have lots of energy security that we can generate, right? We can generate energy through the various rivers, and we can supply to the India can supply to the Bangladesh, right. So these are the steps that is required to to realize hydrocarbon cooperation between India and Bangladesh. River problem basically, 51 rivers, then especially Tista and small important rivers issues should be resolved. So it was a direct question, you need to give direct answer. Now let me move to the next question. Here, explain the significance of Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for India and US strategic relation. Now it is called BECA. So one should start with BCEA, along with LEMOA, SISMOA, right, are the important agreement between US and India regarding defense, right, and strategic cooperation. Now come to the BECA, right. BCA actually established 2+2 dialogue. 2+2 dialogue. What is 2+2 dialogue? Here the defense minister and Minister of External Affairs, so these two Minister of External Affairs, Minister of Defense ministers talked with the counterpart, right, and BCA established so we have 5 dialogue, 2+2 dialogue between India and US, right, right. Although India had also started 2+2 dialogue with other country like Japan, like Australia, right, and with Russia, but our partnership with US is very important. Now look at the basic significance of the BECA, the Basic Exchange of Cooperation Agreement. It allow information, right, intelligence Indian military to access intelligence information, right, from the US, and it will also, along with the LEMOA and SISMOA, the US also give logistical support to India, right, and it is very important in the wake of rise of China and its threat to India, right. So that is the basic significance of this Basic Exchange of and Economic Agreement for India US strategic relations, right. Now let me move to the next one. Now here the fifth 150 words or 10 marker question, discuss the role of public diplomacy in the enhancement of India's global standing. Now if you look at the public diplomacy, right, actually done by of course a statesman and also a ambassador, right, and if you look at the initial page, India focused on NAM, but at the present time India is focusing on multi-level engagement with many countries, right. It is a multi-level engagement with all countries, with all powers. So we are living in a post non-alignment world, right. Indian foreign policy is living in a post NAM world. We are not actually agree with not to ally with the power. No, we are aligning at multi-level with all power of the world. We are aligning with China, we are interacting with Russia, we are interacting with US, we are interacting with Japan, right. India is the sole country, right, at the global level, along with the few countries, right, who can talk, right, with the both the power, right. They can also talk to the US, they can also talk to the Russia, right. So we are actually, so this is the the role of public diplomacy to enhance India's global standing. If you look at India, India is a member of the BRICS, India is a member of the SCO, India is a special guest in G7, right. So if you look at and India has greater claim on UN Security Council permanent seat, right. So India's global image grown exponentially in recent decade through the public diplomacy. Fine. Now let me move to the next question. The next question is discuss the relevance of demand for new international economic order in the present era of globalization. It was 90, so one should start with the new. What is new? Right, it was a new international economic order demand. Actually, it was a demand in 1970s, right, to restructure the Bretton Woods system. So restructure WTO, not that time, that was not WTO, restructure the World Bank, right, restructure the IMF, and restructure the GATT and GATT, and make the international economic order in favor of the third world country who are at the receiving, who are being actually exploited through the international economic order, right. And UNCTD report was the actually UNCTD report was actually finalizing how how the existing economic order is favoring the developed country in 1970, right. And it was a 1973 oil crisis which was juncture from which the world demanded new international economic order. Now second, third para you need to write about the present. Now if you look at the present economic order, right, there are many alternative economic institutions. For example, there is a BRICS fund, there are Asian Development Bank, China has developed its own the fund, BRI fund, right. So there is an alternative financial institution have already established, yet the international economic order is ruled by the Bretton Woods system, World Bank, IMF and GATT, right. And therefore there is a need to restructure the international economic order, right. For example, the emerging economy like India, Brazil, China, right, this South Africa should have more voice at World Bank and IMF and should have more voting right, and it should have more voice at WTO, the GATT, the current incarnation of GATT. And NEO is a relevant demand even today. So that how you need to wrap up it. Now come to the next question. Critically examine the major factors responsible for turnaround in the trajectory of India's foreign policy in the post-Cold War period. Now critically examine the major factors responsible for turnaround in the trajectory of, look at the 1990, this was the, so for first one should start with the India's foreign policy and its major factors, what determines India's foreign policy, right. Since 1990 was the major it was a time when the international scenario totally changed due to the collapse of Soviet Union, due to the fall of Berlin Wall, and due to the Washington Consensus, right, which prescribed to adopt a structural adjustment program and open the market economy, right, and follow the new liberal economic agenda. Now that if you look at this 1990, there was a many factors, right. So what was the factor? Like collapse of USSR, right, collapse of USSR, then the fall of Berlin Wall, right, and then you can see Washington Consensus. Right. Then if you see the US as a hegemon power, these were the external responsible factor. Now to look at the internal factor of, if you look at the internal factor, if you see the Indian economy was stagnant basically. What Raj Krishna talked about, the Hindu growth of rate, right, Hindu growth rate, right. So internal factor, if you look at India was actually, but if you look at the option, we have opted LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization, right, and it is a 2022, right, we have experienced 32 years of liberalization, privatization and globalization, but we can see that even we are unable to either make a good relationship with the US, right. Globalization has produced a huge inequality within India, right. India is unable to conclude its solid side key with whom we should be there, right, whether we should be with the US or whether we should be with the USSR. But at the same time USSR also looked India with suspicious eyes, right. So these are the some critical points that one need to mention, right. But at the same time we see that there are remarkable change in India's image due to the foreign policy we have opted in the wake of collapse of the USSR in the 90s, in the post Cold War, right. And Indian market, Indian economy has actually expanded, right. So that should be the answer. Now let me move to the next question. Now come to the NPT. Discuss the reason behind India's refusal to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So one should start with the NPT. What is NPT? Right. So NPT is a non-proliferation treaty agreement evolved in 1968, right. And many it was headed by the US and many countries signed on it. India did not sign on NPT, right. Why India did not sign on NPT? Because India argued, or India's position was that none of the country should possess nuclear weapon, right. So first those countries like P5 who possess a nuclear weapon should abolish it, right, destroy it, and then they first sign it and then we will sign it. And therefore NPT is a very much discriminatory, right. It is creating the worlds between two haves and haves not, possessing nuclear weapon or not possessing nuclear weapon. But India had a threat, right, from China and Pakistan, right. So India actually did not, and India did first nuclear explosion in 1974 and second in 1998, and declared its nuclear policy, right, as and that we are developed with only credible minimum deterrence, right, and we will use nuclear weapon for peaceful purposes, not on India is not going to use it at first instance. So we will have no first use policy. So that's way that one have to wrap up the questions answers. Now move to the next question. The next question is, what are the main drivers of Indo-Japan strategic and global partnership? Now if you see the India and Japan, right, India and Japan. So first one should start with India-Japan relationship. How much it is a historical, India is a, the Buddhism has traveled from India to Japan, right, and if you look at since 1990, India-Japan relationship can be divided into three parts, right. So since till 1950, and from ancient to till 1950 to 1990, right, and 1990 to 2005, and one may put the fourth phase 2005 to 2022. In the last phase we have developed a very strategic and global partnership with Japan, right. For example, India and Japan is a global partner. We have 2+2 dialogue, right. There are more than 5,000 companies, trading companies, who have invested in India, right, and promoting economic growth and employment and writing a story of development. So there is a defense partnership, there are developmental partnership, there are cooperation, technological cooperation, there are many there is investment, right. So there are many factors, right, there are many drivers of India's Japan strategic relationship. We are also partnered in Quad, Quad, right, and India and Japan both are democratic country. We share lots of value, for example, democracy, freedom and rule of law, right. India, Japan also shares some sense of cultural tie. So we have lots of cultural tie, right. There are Vivekananda Center, right, in Japan. There are Indian diaspora in Japan who is playing role. Especially if you look at the strategic relationship, we have 2+2 dialogue. India is a special strategic partner, global partner of Japan, and Japan is India's a special global partnership, right, and we have also Quad, right, fine. So that one need to lots of information, there are lots of information one need to put, and one can quote some few scholar, right, and especially the trading partnership that developed in between India and Japan in the recent decade. Now let me move to the next question. The next question is, what are the implications of lookist policy on northeastern region of India? Now first one need to talk about the lookist policy, started by P.V. Narasimha Rao, right, in the 1990, right, and India tried to make a global partnership or an economic connectedness with the East Asian country, because the East Asian country, especially Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, they were the rising tigers, they were rising, and India, on the wake of LPG, India, gave slogan of lookist policy. It meant that India tried to connect with Southeast Asian country, right, and through various means, right, and northeastern region is a bridge between India and Southeast Asia, right. So, without developing northeastern region and transit system, infrastructure and so on and so forth, we cannot have a cannot act act on lookist policy. At the same time, Prime Minister Modi given from lookist policy to actist policy, right. And even here Japan is helping us a lot for the development of northeast region, right, that directly connect us with Bangladesh, and also it connects with Myanmar and other Indonesia and other country of Southeast Asia, right. And if you look at the implication of lookist policy on northeastern region has become a center stage of India's development, all right, whether it is a infrastructural development, whether it is a investment, whether it is a growth, whether it is a industries, etc., right. So, that would be the answer. Now, let me move to the next question. Explain the factors which justify India's claim for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. Explain the factors which justify India's claim for permanent seat at the UN Security Council. Now, one should start with the United Nations Security Council, right, UNSC. So, who are the member, like P5 is a permanent member in the United Nations Security Council, right. They are the members since 1945, right, when only 51 country signed on United Nations conventions. Now we have 193 members in the United Nations General Assembly, but United Nations Security Council still is a exclusive body of 5 countries, right, US, Russia, China, UK and France. Now, if you look at the developing country, for example, if you look at the UNSC, only China, only one Asian country have permanent membership. If you see the Africa does not have, not a single country have membership. For Latin America, not a single country from the Latin America has membership of UNSC. Now, in the changing global scenario, there is a need to democratize United Nations Security Council, and in order to democratize United Nations Security Council, it could be expanded, right. The new members could be accommodated in United Nations Security Council for greater responsibility at global level, right. So, if you see the G4, for example, G4 like Japan, South Africa, right, India, Brazil, they are claiming for permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, right. The factors why these countries are actually talking wants permanent member. First, they are democratic country, right. They are democratic country, right, and they are representing the democracy, right. Secondly, they if you look at, they are emerging economy. They are emerging economy and they can fulfill the international responsibility. Third, if you look at the India can represent, right, the third world voice. India can represent the third world voice at United Nations Security Council. It can represent the the developing countries and their concern, right. If you look at the on power, India has emerged as a also global power, right, in terms of trade, in terms of economy, right, in terms of finance, in terms of diaspora, in terms of military, right, in terms of global leadership, right. So, therefore, these are the factors which justifies India's claim for a permanent seat at United Nations Security Council, right? India wants to play a responsible actor at international level. Fine. So that you have to wrap up like this. Now let me talk about the next question. I think this is the last question. It has 3 questions. Question number 8. So I will talk about 8A, 8B, 8C. 3 more questions. Now look at this. How does India-Israel bilateral ties reflect the autonomy of India's foreign policy choices? Now one should start with India-Israel bilateral relationship, right? So how our relationship since 2005 has become very stringent, right? It was only 1992 we have established embassy in Israel, right? And if you look at the India-Israel relationship, we have defense ties, right? We have defense sector, right? We have cooperation in trade, right? We have cooperation in trade. Now we have cooperation in commerce, right? We have cooperation in security, right? We have cooperation in agriculture, science and technology, right? Cooperation in science and technology, right? For example, India is learning a lot, especially the agriculture, how to revive agricultural product and how to manage water, right? Now if you see, Israel was ignored by the India till 2005, right? And thereafter India is not coming pressure from the Middle East countries, right, that India should not have autonomous relationship or free relationship with Israel. Now if you look at India-Israel relationship, which has become very closer, right, and especially in defense sector, Israel is helping India, right? Israel has given lots of defense equipment to India. India is the first largest trade partner with Israel, right? So the trade we have developed, for example, there are many Indian companies like Mahindra, like SBI Bank, like Tata is working in Israel. There are many science and cooperation technology. For example, Israel is helping India in water management, in agriculture, etc., right? And there are university, there is a diaspora, so diaspora exchange between India and Israel, right? Now this relationship reflects an independent policy of India's foreign diplomacy, foreign policy. Indian foreign policy is not under pressure of any region or any country. It is an independent, right? And we have India-Israel have strengthened the cooperation and coordination, right? And if you look at I2U2, where the Israel and India, I2 means India, Israel, United States of Emirat and US, right, is also playing important role at this forum, right? So India and Israel bilateral ties reflect a free India's foreign policy. Now let me move to the next question. Now come to discuss the consequences of illegal cross-border migration in India's northeastern region. Now if you look at the India's northeastern region, we have border, India has border with, so first first one need to talk about northeastern region, right? So for example, northeastern region Northeastern region has border with Bangladesh, it has border with Myanmar, right? We have border with China, right? And there are free flow of migration, especially migration from Myanmar like Rohingya, and there is a migration from Bangladesh to the northeastern region, and they are making flooding into various states like Assam, like Nagaland, like Manipur, right? And they are actually making a demographic change in northeastern region, and that led to many violence in northeastern region, right? And they are also having impact on the local development, right? If you look at the northeastern region, they few states already have ILP status, inner line permit, but state like Assam is also demanding ILP, so that they can they can curb on the illegal cross border migration, right? Apart from it, if you look, there are insurgency also that is being the problem in India's northeastern, illegal cross border migration in India's northeastern region. So these are the consequences of illegal cross migration, border migration in India's northeastern region from Bangladesh and from Myanmar especially, right? Even it has also one problem, that our relationship with Myanmar and with Bangladesh is not so normal on the issue of Rohingya, right? We are not supporting the expulsion of Rohingya by the Myanmar. So that is the problem, that are the issues that we need to talk about in this question. Let me move to the next question. Now discuss India's vision of new world order in the 21st century. Now the concept of new or world order one should write first. So one should start with what is new world order, right? New world order, and one should introduce with this new world order, right? For example, one should start with George Bush, the father of George W. Bush, started this talking about new world order in 1991, right? And it was a hegemonic world, right? US dominated world. Now that that age has passed, now we are living in 21st century. Now how India envision the world order, right? So India of course believes in UN Charter, right? India believes in UN Charter, that every nation state follow the UN Charter. Secondly, India wants a free and democratic world, right, which is based on free and democratic world, right? India wants everything, dialogue should be the criteria to negotiate any issues, fine. So for example, Panchsheel, we have a formula to talk about our world vision, right? As far as South Pacific region is concerned, right, we want free, equitable, right, and just world. We want, right, just world. If you talk about the Pacific region, we want inclusive, free, Indo-Pacific region, right? Indo-Pacific region. and we don't support the dominance of any country in Indo-Pacific region. We should all follow the international law, right? The UN clause, United Nations Convention of Law on Seas, UN clause, right? So that is the India's vision of new world order, that we want free, equitable and just world. It should be based on dialogue, right? It should be a democratic world, and we all follow UN Charter, right? And we follow inclusive, free and Indo-Pacific, and we also want to follow UN clause, right? That is the India's vision of new world order. That's all, right? I hope I have done. The time was very limited, so I have talked about the if you have any question, right, you can comment. I'll answer to you. Thank you so much for watching.